prostitution should be legal because I don't think that people should tell other people how to live their lives. Like, if women want to go and sell their body for money, clearly they're doing it because they need the money, so why stop them from doing it? And I think
a lot of prostitution is also addicting girls to drugs and then putting them on the street, so it just turns out to be a lot of bad things.
Prostitution has existed within societies since the ancient world. The arguments for and against prostitution have evolved drastically over time. Originally, religious and moral arguments were used to condemn prostitution. The Code of Hammurabi, an ancient set of laws carved into stone in 1780 BC, first defined a set of rights for prostitutes and their children. The Renaissance era was home to the first epidemic caused by prostitution. In the 1490s, a syphilis outbreak ravaged most of Europe. The industrial era brought a rise in legalized prostitution as well as STD testing across Europe and especially in the Netherlands, home of the infamous city of Amsterdam. With World War II came an increase in prostitution for the soldiers of every army in the conflict. From the Japanese military running its own system of brothels in occupied China to the houses visited by British and American troops in France and Germany. After the war, however, many of the nations that had been fighting adopted laws prohibiting prostitution. Many of those laws are still in effect today. Modern times have brought further medical testing of prostitutes in areas where the act is legal. Prostitutes' rights groups such as the International Committee of Prostitutes' Rights have also formed to advocate for a myriad of issues including general legalization, human trafficking, forced prostitution, and social perceptions of prostitutes. The modern age has also led to an exponential change in the arguments used both to support and condemn legalized prostitution. A survey of current college students shows that more than half of students believe that prostitution should not be legalized, while over a third believe that the practice should be legal. This contrasts with the public opinion only 50 years ago, when roughly 70% of the public believed prostitution to be harmful to society. The economic benefits of prostitution is an argument that has changed drastically since the completion of more advanced studies analyzing the ability of prostitutes to earn a living wage. Is prostitution lucrative enough to be considered worthy of legalization? In the early 1910s, 1 in every 50 American women was a prostitute. At this time, a prostitute in Chicago would earn $25 per week, which converts to a modern salary of $25,000. Currently, their weekly take-home pay is roughly $350, which includes an average of $20 that the prostitute steals from her customers. That means their annual salary is $18,200. As you can see, the pay has fallen drastically since the early 1910s because demand has fallen drastically. Sex outside of marriage is much easier to come by nowadays. This is at the very low end of what Chicago prostitutes earned, however. Women working in a brothel in the same Chicago area in 1910 took home an average weekly salary of $7, or the modern equivalent of about $76,000 annually. Currently, the average annual income of an employee at one Nevada brothel, where prostitution is legal, is at least $100,000. A major argument about the legalization of the practice is centered around its impact on the economic well-being of our country. First, many argue that the tax dollars used to fight prostitution are an unnecessary waste of money. We spend approximately $7.5 million annually in each city on prosecuting and jailing those sex workers the law now defines as criminals. Law enforcement agencies in America's biggest cities spend an average of about $2,000 for each arrest of a prostitute, which amounts to more than $120 million a year in enforcement costs nationwide. Not only are we wasting existing tax dollars, some argue, but we're also throwing away tax dollars that could easily be collected if prostitution were to be legalized. Based on this figure, each legally licensed sex worker would contribute more than $20,000 in federal income taxes per year. Considering that current estimations show over 1 million prostituted women in America, the tax revenue generated by the industry becomes a staggering $20 billion per year. The economic argument does not take into account the healthcare costs of prostitutes being injured by violent johns. There are many health risks associated with prostitution. One case study that epitomizes these health risks is a 1994 analysis of 68 women in Minneapolis, Minnesota. These women had been prostituting for at least 6 months and suffered from issues in 3 main categories, including physical, psychological, and physiological health. In regards to physical health, 1/2 of the women experienced physical assaults by their purchasers. 23% of those suffered broken bones, and 2 were beaten so badly that they entered into a coma. In regards to psychological health, 46% of the women attempted suicide and 19% tried physical harm in other ways. The cause of such behaviors is rooted in severe trauma, stress, depression, anxiety, and self-medication through alcohol and drug abuse. Lastly, in regards to physiological health, many of these prostitutes contracted chlamydia, syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, HIV, and pelvic inflammatory disease. Only 15% of the women had never contracted a sexually transmitted disease. These many health risks associated with prostitution often influence arguments for or against the legalization of this public controversy. Advocates of the legalization of prostitution believe that legalizing it will allow the act to be monitored rather than ignored. One way to monitor legal prostitutes is through regular screening, tests, and treatment. For instance, in Nevada, prostitutes are checked frequently and have better health than street prostitutes.
Than there is in legal prostitution. In 34 years of mandatory testing, we haven't had one case of HIV or AIDS. No other
Let's
career can
be clear about that. In Nevada, where it's legal, except in the big cities,
yes,
there's testing every 30 days.
Every
there's
week.
No violence, no muggings, no AIDS.
No, because the police can come in. No one's going to come into our facility and cause a problem because they're locked in there until the sheriff comes. So it tends to be a very relaxed, fun environment. It's not the seediness that you get from the illegal side of prostitution.
Another way to monitor legal prostitutes is through the protection of the police from abusive customers. Since prostitution is considered a crime in the United States, police officers often harass and incarcerate these sex workers, whereas in legalized regions such as the Netherlands and Denmark, police officers defend them against rape and other physical abuse. This point is validated by Mariska Major, an employee in the Prostitution Center of Amsterdam.
I think it's easier to do something about that when prostitution is legal than if it is illegal. Because if it's legal as a sex worker, you feel a lot safer here than in places where it is illegal and dangerous, like on the street somewhere. It's illegal, so you will not go to the police to ask for help. You have to run away if you see the police because you're doing something wrong. And maybe it's even more stigmatized in those countries than it is here. So yes, we have trafficking in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam as well, but it's easier to do something against that than in countries where it is illegal.
Advocates also argue that monitored prostitutes have better psychological health than their illegal counterparts. Due to a sense of professionalism and a job that helps them provide for their families in a legal way, these prostitutes have higher self-esteem and lower levels of depression. This is proven by the juxtaposition of suicide rates in the United States and the Netherlands. Opponents of the legalization of prostitution fear that these health implications will worsen if the occupation becomes universally accepted. One prime example is a statement made by Dr. Reginald Finger. Experts estimate that there is 1 to 2 million illegal prostitutes working in the United States today. These numbers would drastically increase if prostitution was legalized, and there simply would not be enough resources to monitor each one. As the majority of these prostitutes are females, women's advocates are often going to influence the popular opinion. Women's rights are an aspect of society that have directly influenced the way the public perceives prostitution. Supporters of legalizing or decriminalizing prostitution often cite a woman's need to provide for herself in any way she wants. They also make the case that there is equally exploitive work that happens every day without health benefits and risk of injury. While this may not be the ideal profession, imprisoning the women in this position is not helping them. The Caribbean Sex Workers Coalition declared sex work is work and must be recognized and treated as par with other professions where labor conditions are just. And labor conditions could be just and regulated if prostitution was legalized. Legal in Nevada, brothel owners argue that they can guarantee fair treatment as well as safe and healthy work environments. The ability to legally regulate prostitution can help protect prostitutes from health risks, violence, and extortion from pimps. Many feminists have argued that women have the right to decide what they do with their bodies. A leading feminist states that a man's dependence on a woman prostitute empowers the woman. However, many women's rights advocates disagree with legalizing prostitution. These feminists have their roots in the progressive era, who supported severe state suppression of prostitution on moral grounds. Radical feminists made the case that prostitution reinforces male domination and the idea of women as sexual objects. Others insist that legalizing prostitution will not better the lives of prostitutes or prevent sex trafficking. In Germany, the government thought that legalization, which occurred in 2002, would decrease sex trafficking and form safer conditions for prostitutes. However, legalization did not reduce sex trafficking and also failed to change the stigma attached to prostitution. One women's rights group called prostitution a modern form of slavery because many women are not free to make their own choices. Female prostitutes frequently come from poverty and minorities and are treated as commodities because of their desperate circumstances. This is a fairly equal split among feminists regarding the legality of prostitution. Many groups, such as Women's Coalition, Real Women, and Women's Supporters Projects, are extremely against legalizing or decriminalizing prostitution. Other singular women's rights activists and groups like the Feminist Coalition support women's rights to control over their bodies and profession.
I feel that if one day prostitution would be eventually legalized in the U.S., it could prove beneficial in a variety of ways, such as the regulation of it could reduce maybe sexually transmitted diseases, or it could be taxed, making money off of that. However, I feel that because of the society we live in, the chances of it being legalized, at least in the near future, are very small.